My parents threw me out because I refused to cover my brother's $180,000 fraud. 6 days later, they showed up at my door. Before I start, welcome back to Revenge Diaries. If you love stories about betrayal, truth, and the kind of justice that hits hard without needing to scream, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read more of your comments than you think. Now let me tell you what happened to me. My father told me to pay my brother's debt the way someone might ask you to close a window. Calm, practical, already decided. Your brother owes $180,000, he said. You have the money. You're going to handle it. It was a Thursday evening in late February, the kind of cold Ohio evening that made the sky look bruised before sunset. I was still wearing my coat. I had only stopped by my parents' house because my mother said it was important. And when your mother uses that voice, some part of you still responds even when you're 33 and should know better. The kitchen smelled like baked chicken and rosemary. Plates were on the counter. No one had started dinner. That should have told me something. In my family, bad news was always served before the meal, as if hunger made people easier to control. My father sat at the table with both forearms resting on the wood. My mother sat beside the window, twisting her wedding ring without seeming to know she was doing it. My younger brother, Nolan, stood near the sink, staring at the floor like he had misplaced something there and was too embarrassed to admit it. I stayed near the doorway. I said, "What do you mean I'm going to handle it?" My father looked at me the way he always did when he thought I was delaying the inevitable instead of disagreeing. Nolan got in over his head, he said. There were business losses, some tax issues, some private lenders. It got complicated. Nolan still did not look up. That was interesting. Nolan usually loved being the center of any room, especially when someone else was expected to clean up after him. How complicated? I asked. 180,000, my father said again, slower this time, like repetition could turn madness into reason. If it isn't paid quickly, there will be charges, court involvement. Maybe worse. We are not letting that happen. We. That word did a lot of work in my family. It usually meant I was about to be volunteered for something expensive. I looked at Nolan. What did you do? He finally lifted his head. His face was tired, but not ashamed enough. I borrowed from the wrong people. That answer sat there for a second. I said, "That sounds like a line from a bad crime show, not an explanation." My mother flinched. My father didn't. "He made mistakes," my father said. "He is your brother. Right now, blame is not useful. Action is useful." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, because sometimes your body reaches for disbelief before it reaches for anger. You want me to write a check for $180,000 because Nolan borrowed from people you won't even name? My father's expression changed very slightly. That was how it always started with him. Not shouting, not dramatic rage, just a cooling, a tightening. A small shift that meant he had moved from persuasion to authority. "You sold your company shares last year," he said. "You have the liquidity." There it was, not concern, inventory. He knew exactly what I had. Of course he did. I had made the mistake of telling my mother about the buyout 8 months ago. I hadn't given a number, but families like mine didn't need numbers. They only needed proof that rescue was possible. "That money is mine," I said. My father leaned back in his chair. "And Nolan is your brother?" My mother finally spoke, softly. "Elena, he's in real trouble." Her voice nearly got me. Nearly, because my mother had always known how to make a demand sound like a prayer. I turned to her. "How long have you known?" She looked at Nolan first, That was enough. Not because I needed details, because I needed order. The glance told me what came first. Him, then my father, then the plan, then me, invited in at the end to finance it. I nodded once. Nolan said, "I was going to fix it." I looked at him. With what? He opened his mouth, closed it. Exactly. My father said, "This family is not going to be humiliated because you want to make a point." I remember that sentence very clearly because it rearranged the room for me. Until then, I had still been pretending this was about fear, about panic, about a son in trouble. But humiliation? That was the real emergency, not what Nolan had done, not what it could cost me, just how it would look. I took off my gloves slowly and set them on the counter. I wanted my hands free. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I had the sudden feeling I was standing in a place where I had never really been safe, and my body understood it before my mind did. Then I said, "No." No one spoke for a second after I said it. The refrigerator hummed, a car passed outside. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and stopped. Ordinary sounds. That was the strange part. Life kept moving with complete indifference while my family sat in that kitchen deciding what I was worth to them. My father was the first to recover. He folded his hands on the table and said very evenly, "Then don't expect to come back here asking for anything." I stared at him. "I'm not asking for anything now," I said. "You know what I mean." I did. My father had always believed love was something measured in usefulness. If you were useful, you belonged. If you were difficult, you were selfish. If you drew a boundary, you were disloyal. It was an old family religion, one no one had ever named out loud, because naming a thing sometimes makes it easier to reject. My mother stood up so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "Please," she said, and the word broke in the middle. "Elena, just think about this one more time. Nolan is scared." I looked at Nolan. He had started crying quietly, but there was something off about it. Not fake exactly, just familiar. Nolan had cried his way through consequences since he was 10 years old. Late rent, wrecked cars, broken promises, a failed online business he swore was one big break away from success. Every disaster in his life arrived with a story attached, and every story ended with someone else paying for it. I said, "He should be." My father pushed back his chair and stood. "If you walk out on your family tonight," he said, "then understand something clearly. You are choosing that, not us." That sentence almost impressed me. It was so clean, so polished. It took their demand, their ultimatum, their years of favoritism, and placed all of it in my hands, like I had built the trap myself. I put my gloves back on. Then I picked up my bag from the chair by the door and said, "You know what's interesting? Every time Nolan wrecks something, all of you talk like the real problem is my refusal to smile while cleaning it up." My mother started crying harder. Nolan said my name once, softly, like he wanted credit for using a gentle tone. I didn't look at him. My father said, "If you leave now, don't come back." I opened the front door. Then I turned just enough to look at all three of them and said, "I think the truth is, I was only welcome here as long as I kept paying emotionally for being the reliable one." Then I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need the sound. I already knew what had broken. The drive back to Columbus took 43 minutes. I know that because I watched the clock each time I stopped at a red light, not out of panic, but because I needed something measurable, something objective, something that could not be rewritten later by family memory. When I got home, I hung up my coat, placed my bag on the kitchen chair, and stood in the dark for a full minute before turning on the light. My apartment looked exactly the way I'd left it that morning. Clean counters, a stack of unopened mail, a blue mug in the sink. Peaceful. Honest. Mine. Then my phone started vibrating. Mom, Dad, Nolan, Mom again. I turned it face down. After that, I made tea I didn't want, sat at my kitchen table, and did the thing I always do when something feels wrong but no one around me is telling the truth. I started checking facts. First, my bank accounts. Everything looked normal. Then my credit monitoring app. I logged in expecting nothing. Maybe a low score fluctuation. Maybe an old inquiry I'd forgotten about. What I found instead made me set the mug down so carefully it almost felt ceremonial. My score had dropped 126 points in 2 months. That is not an accident. That is not a billing delay. That is not life being messy. That is damage. I opened the full report. There was the mortgage on my condo, my Visa card, my car loan already paid down. Everything I knew. Everything I could account for. Then there were 3 accounts I had never seen before. A business equipment loan for $62,000, a merchant cash advance for $48,000, a high-limit business credit card with a balance just over $39,000. I stared at the screen. All 3 were linked to a consulting company I had never owned. All 3 listed me as guarantor. One of them used my old address from 5 years ago. Another listed an email address that was a variation of mine, close enough to pass, wrong enough to hide. I went very still, and then I saw the total. 149,000, not 180, which meant one of 2 things. Either my father had lied about the number to make it sound cleaner, or one part of Nolan's mess was in his name, and another part had already been moved into mine. I didn't cry. Not then. I printed every page. Then I called the only person I knew who would tell me the truth before she told me what to do. My friend Camille answered on the second ring. I said, "I think my brother used my identity." There was a pause. Then she said, very calmly, "Don't call your family back. Freeze everything. And tomorrow, you're coming with me to a lawyer." The next morning, Camille drove me to a consumer fraud attorney named Naomi Reed. Naomi's office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building above a tax firm and a dentist. Nothing dramatic. No polished TV lawyer energy. Just a quiet woman in a charcoal blazer, a legal pad, and the kind of eyes that notice details before you finished speaking. She read every page I brought her. She asked 3 questions. When did you first co-sign anything for Nolan? Who in your family had access to your personal documents? Has anyone besides you benefited from these accounts? Then she looked up and said, "Elena, this is not family debt. This is identity fraud." I remember going completely still, not because I didn't suspect it, because hearing it out loud changed the shape of everything. Naomi helped me freeze my credit, file disputes with the lenders, and submit an identity theft report before noon. She also sent formal notices demanding the original applications, signatures, IP records, and delivery addresses tied to those accounts. By that evening, one lender had already responded. The equipment loan had been approved using copies of my tax returns, copies I had never sent. Copies my father had once asked for 2 years earlier when he said Nolan needed help organizing paperwork for a lease. I had emailed them without thinking. That night, I sat on my couch staring at my living room wall and felt something colder than anger settle into place. This hadn't started last month. This had been built. Carefully, quietly, with full confidence that I would either never find out or find out and stay silent. Day 3, my father called 11 times. Day 4, my mother left me a voicemail that began with crying and ended with, "Please don't ruin your brother's life over a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. $149,000 in my name, and somehow I was still expected to be the reasonable one. Day 5. Naomi called and told me 2 lenders had flagged the file internally because the signatures did not match my driver's license record. One account also traced back to an address that belonged to Nolan's girlfriend before they broke up. And then, on day 6, my building buzzer rang. I checked the lobby camera. My parents were downstairs. Nolan was with them. So was a woman I recognized immediately, my Aunt Celeste, my mother's older sister, the one relatives brought in when they wanted Mercy to sound official. I pressed the button, not because I wanted them upstairs, because I was done being cornered on their terms. When I opened the door, no one moved right away. My father looked older than he had 6 days earlier. My mother looked like she hadn't slept. Nolan looked exactly like people do when charm has finally stopped working. "Elena," my mother whispered, "please." I stepped back once and let them enter. No one sat down. I didn't offer. Nolan started first, speaking too fast. He said it got out of control. He said he meant to pay everything back. He said he only used my information because the first lender wouldn't work with him otherwise. He said Dad helped with paperwork but didn't understand how far it had gone. He said Mom only found out later. Every sentence made him look smaller. Then my father spoke, and this was the part I think I will remember for the rest of my life. Not because of what he said, because of how different his voice sounded when he no longer believed he was in charge. "We can fix this privately," he said. "Tell us what it takes." There it was. Not apology, not truth, just negotiation. I looked at him and said, "It's already past private." My aunt frowned. "Elena, don't make permanent decisions in anger." I turned to her. "I made them in documentation." That shut the room up. Then I told them. I told them the disputes were active. I told them the signatures were under review. I told them the lenders had begun fraud procedures. I told them my attorney had copies of everything. Nolan went pale. My mother started crying again, quietly this time. And then, finally, she said the one honest thing anyone in my family had said since this started. "I knew about one of the accounts," she whispered. "I thought your father had handled it." I looked at her. She couldn't hold my gaze. That hurt more than Nolan, more than my father. Because betrayal from weakness leaves a different bruise than betrayal from greed. I nodded once and said, "Thank you for finally telling the truth." Then I looked at all of them and said very clearly, "You need to leave." Nolan stared at me like he still expected the old version of me to appear at the last second. The one who explained things away, the one who paid in peace so everyone else could keep pretending they were good people. She didn't come. My father lowered his head. My aunt touched my mother's arm. And for the first time in my life, my family walked out of my home with nothing from me. 3 months later, the fraudulent accounts were removed from my file. Nolan was charged. My father was not charged, but his business records were reviewed, and that alone shattered whatever authority he used to hide behind. My mother still sends short messages on holidays. I answer some of them. Not all. And me? I sleep better now. That's the part people never talk about when they ask whether justice is worth the cost. Yes, it costs you something. But so does being chosen as the person your family is willing to sacrifice. I paid enough for that role already. Never again.